Hello there guys and welcome back to a brand new Star Wars Battlefront 2 weapon guide video. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but today I'm going to be focusing on the CR-2. These weapon guides will now have 3 segments to them, the first being attachments, then I'll move on to star cards, and then I'll finish off with some general tips and tricks. If you're more interested in the general tips and tricks and you don't want to know what attachments or star cards to use, then you'll notice that the video bar has different segments on that, which will allow you to skip to the relevant sections that you want to see. Without further ado though, let's get into the attachments. The CR-2, like all weapons, has 3 attachments with the ability to equip 2 at any one time. These 3 attachments are Reduced Recoil, Ion Shot and Night Vision. I'd always recommend having Reduced Recoil equipped as it makes aiming and getting kills at longer ranges even easier. I'd also recommend Ion Shot for any mode and map that allows use of tanks. Thankfully, Ion Shot doesn't reduce the time to kill on people too much, so it's still a relatively fast kill at short range and it allows you to do even more damage to vehicles. The damage to vehicles can be pretty significant, however you need to ensure that you're in a safe space to be able to actually fire on it for a fairly long time. As a quick hit and run, the Ion Shot will barely do anything, so it's not really worth doing. So the best thing to do is obviously find the weak spots on the vehicles and just give it hell. For modes like Blast and Strike or even the ship phase in Capital Supremacy, I wouldn't really recommend using the Ion Shot too much, as you'll really want to get the kills as fast as you can. That said, the Ion Shot can take down Personal Shield or Combat Shield really quickly, so it's best to keep in mind, especially if a lot of the enemy team are using these shields. The time to kill is still fairly quick at close range, so perhaps Ion Shot is something you'd want to consider and keep on just in case. Lastly, with regards to Night Vision, I wouldn't ever recommend using this over anything else, as most, if not all the places in the game are pretty well lit, and enemies are always pretty easy to see, so I really don't see any need for it. Now onto the star cards. I always use these 3 star cards no matter what gun I'm using for the Assault class. No matter what, it will pretty much always be these 3. The star cards that I use are Improved Thermal Detonator, Toughen Up and Survivalist. Improved Thermal Detonator is really great as it has a pretty large blast radius and can deal a ton of damage to enemies, especially in groups. I'd really recommend using the Thermal Detonator when pushing into objectives or choke points, as when the enemy team sees the grenade indicator they'll attempt to flee, or they'll just take a ton of damage and hopefully die. This will then allow you and your team to charge in and finish off anyone that remains. Obviously that won't work every single time, but when it does, it can really change the momentum of the fight. Toughen Up is great as well, as this starts a health regen instantly on use. You could get shot and pretty much straight away your health will be coming back. When pushing into objectives and choke points, using Toughen Up can be really useful, as no doubt from somewhere you'll be getting shot. Thanks to Toughen Up, you'll get your health back, or at least to a point that could hopefully give you an upper hand against your enemy. The Survivalist star card at the maximum rarity, so the purple epic card, reduces the standard time of the health regen by 40%. So if you're on Kashyyyk for example and you're running between one turbo tanks to the next and you get shot from somewhere, then your health regen is pretty much halved, and therefore you won't need to waste your Toughen Up ability unless you're in a really sticky situation. The Survivalist star card can be great for CQC maps or locations, especially if you don't have Toughen Up on hand, and as I alluded to before, in the longer range lower risk situations is the best thing to have so that you don't waste Toughen Up. Now for the general tips and tricks. The CR-2, as you will have noticed from the gameplay, really isn't something to be used for longer range combat. If you find yourself in these situations, then honestly I'd recommend just changing weapons to either the E11D or the EL16 HFE. It can be pretty useful for medium range combat though, especially if an enemy is already weak. You can finish them off pretty easily if that is the case, but the CR-2 is absolutely the best for short range combat. It's very much an SMG, so CQC is where it's best suited. As I mentioned before when talking about the star cards, the CR-2 is a great weapon for pushing objectives and choke points. If you throw in your grenade, activate Toughen Up, and then push in, you'll have a relatively good chance of getting a few kills and even clearing the area to allow your team to push forward. Reduced recoil pretty much means that the gun doesn't even move at all. If you hold it in until it overheats, then at long range it will definitely make a difference, but in short range situations it will barely make an impact. This therefore means that aiming is actually pretty easy compared to other weapons. With the CR-2 being an easy shot, then I'd recommend jumping and rolling around to try and confuse an enemy. Obviously that won't work all the time, but it can be very useful when you use it right. Aiming for headshots is an obvious thing to do, but if you really want the best result, then definitely aim for the head. The chest is another really good spot to aim as well, as the CR-2 does spread out a bit, so you will miss a fair few headshots at times. So the higher surface area of the chest means that you can land more shots consistently, which obviously can lead to faster kills. And lastly, I'd recommend you only use Toughen Up when it's really necessary. In low risk situations, there's really no need to use it, as it does have about a 22-second recharge time, so survivalists will pretty much have you covered there. And like I've said a couple of times now, if you push objectives and other high risk areas, then it can be really valuable. If there's a whole firing squad of enemies there, then you'll probably die anyway, but it can be really useful just to make sure you activate Toughen Up before you head into that situation. I know this gameplay wasn't the best, but I chose it because it helps demonstrate why it's not really that good at long range, and why it can be an absolute beast at CQC and even decent at medium range. Hopefully you guys found this guide useful. I'd love it if you tried it all out and gave me your thoughts in the comments below. That is it from me today though guys, thank you all very much for watching, and may the force be with you always.